Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is in Vancouver today and tomorrow. We just had an interview. We talked about the housing crisis, oil sands pipelines, and marijuana legalization. Here's what he had to say.
It was nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you as well.
So it's an amazing neighborhood over there, West End, English, British properties over there. Amazing places that anyone would dream of living in, but unfortunately, as you know, and you just alluded to this, utterly unaffordable for the average person. And you can go a lot further than these neighborhoods. You just can't dream of it. Now, you said in your platform that you were going to look at all tools to deal with this. You did make some changes on the mortgage down payments, but since the election, prices around here have gone up 26%. When is your government going to take some real action to deal with this?
Well, there's still more to do, and you know this. I mean, like when I was living here, I had friends who had little places in Kits, but they were looking for affordable homes. They'd have to go all the way out to commercial, which now is unaffordable just like everywhere else. I mean, we're having to go further and further and further to be able to, for middle-class families, to be able to afford something, and that's just not right. Vancouver's a world-class city that draws in investment from around the world, and that's a good thing. We just have to make sure that we're ensuring that the people who live here, who want to raise their families here, who want to build a future here, can actually afford it. And that's why one of the things I'm doing while I'm out here, I'm going to sit down at a round table with experts from all sorts of different fields of expertise around housing to weigh in on what the challenges are and, of course, the different methods we have to succeed and to fix it. There's no way that it's all just the federal government can fix things, because, of course, we have very big tools that will impact on the housing markets in other places like Calgary or Regina or Halifax that have very different realities. But how we work with the province, with the municipalities, target exactly what's going on here, and help people in the Lower Mainland afford their homes is really important.
Do you believe that there is an impact from foreign buying? People have talked about hot money from China. Do you think in Toronto and Vancouver that this is actually having an impact, and is there anything we can do perhaps on the capital gain side, Canada Revenue Agency, to deal with that?
Well, I think absolutely foreign ownership has a role to play. I mean, this is not the first time it's happened. I remember in the years after Expo 86, everyone was worried about Yaletown because of the Hong Kong handover coming up. A whole bunch of people were investing in Yaletown, and there were all these great big buildings that were empty because they were bought as investments and they weren't neighborhoods, and that was having an impact on prices. We made it through that. People made it through that, and we learned from it. We're looking at yes, there's a fair bit of overseas money looking to invest in Vancouver. How can we draw in investments without rendering the city inhospitable to people who've lived here for a long time and want to continue to live here and raise their families here? Getting that balance right is going to be really important to keeping Canada and Vancouver specifically the world-class city it is.
Big attraction during the campaign and leading up to the campaign, but it looks like it's going to take till 2018. Now, we've gotten a lot of, and you've, by the way, I should add, you've told the world that you smoked pot while you were an MP. And so we've gotten a lot of input from people on social media saying, well, wait a second, he believes that it should be legal, and he did it when he was an MP, and yet we still have young people, but anyone, but especially young people all across the country that are getting arrested, getting criminal records that really mess up their lives. They can't go to the United States. How is that fair?
Well, what we put forward as a plan to regulate and control marijuana was based around two very clear and simple principles, and I don't know how many times I said this during the campaign. Yeah. The first one is we need to keep marijuana out of the hands of our kids. Of 29 different developed countries, Canada has the #1 use of underage marijuana. So kids find it too easy now to access marijuana. And whatever you might like to say about marijuana being not as bad as alcohol or cigarettes, it is bad for the developing brain. So making sure that we make it harder for kids to access it is one of the core elements that we're putting forward. The other element is making sure that criminal organizations, gun runners, street gangs don't make the incredible profits that they're right now making off of the sale of marijuana. Yeah. It's keeping our kids safe, keeping our streets safe. I understand the impatience of people who want to have it legalized right away, but we know we need to do this right, which is why we're committing to bringing forward legislation to make it happen next spring, in the spring of 2017. Right. Up until that point, the current legal structure still applies. So it's still illegal to buy marijuana. We're not going to decriminalize it in the meantime because that's funding for criminals, and it does nothing to help young people, make it more difficult for them to access. So there's a lot of people who are looking at that as a problem. We're looking at it as a solution.
Okay, your election platform made a couple of commitments. One of them was in relation to the pipelines that we will not have, that governments make decisions on approvals, but the communities give permission.
Mm-hmm.
Some people view that as a veto. That this is a veto if a community, let's say if the polls suggest that 60% is against it and we have some big rallies and we convince the Prime Minister that we're against this, the pipeline won't come in our backyard. Is it a veto?
And I think as soon as we get into that, okay, rubber stamp, yes or no, up or down, we've lost a little bit of the collaboration and the discussion we need to have. As in everything, we have complex situations with multiple answers, with people who do better out of some scenarios than others, and people who are worried about certain things. What we need to do as a government is fold in a broad range of perspectives, understand the concerns, work to allay the fears as much as we possibly can on a broad range of levels, and work towards a broad consensus from communities, from stakeholders, partnership with Indigenous communities, leadership from science and data. It's governing and making important decisions are always about trade-offs. It's an art as much as it is a science, but building a broad consensus. You don't ever hope for total 100% unanimity, but you do hope that you're going to get a sense that this is the right way to move forward.
Fair enough, but you're kind of dodging my question quite skillfully. But if you don't answer it, people are going to say, okay, well, maybe I do have a veto. Do you really want the public to think that they have a veto when maybe they don't? I mean, obviously they don't have a legal veto. Do they have a veto or not?
What I want the public to know is that we are going to listen, we are going to work with them, we are going to understand their concerns, we're going to work very hard to allay them. Am I going to be able to convince every single individual of any given course of action? Absolutely not. But can I demonstrate the kind of responsibility, the kind of balancing and integrating varied concerns and priorities in a way that is responsible, realistic, and sets us on the right path forward? Absolutely, and that's what Canadians expect.
But I've heard people in the business community say, well, wait a second, we can spend tens of millions of dollars on a project, go through the regulatory review process, but a bad poll could stop us maybe. When you lay it out there that the communities have to give permission, you're implying that they have a veto. Do they have a veto?
What I've heard from business communities is they've recognized that ignoring community voices, that trying to run ramshot across environmental concerns has resulted in not getting the business community pipelines and projects built that people wanted. The previous government's attempt to ignore social license ended up preventing significant projects from being built. And that's where the business community understands that we need to have broad support for these projects.
First Nations. Now, we know from court decisions that First Nations do not have a veto, but they have to be accommodated, consulted intensely in territory before their project goes ahead. Now, when your government endorsed the United Nations Declaration that requires free, prior and informed consent. There are First Nation leaders in this country and others that believe this is a veto. Now, we know that there's not a legal veto here. Even experts on UN law, international law, say this isn't an actual veto, but a lot of people think it is. Is it a veto?
I think we talk about consent, but I prefer to talk about being involved even more than consent. If you look at what our territories have as a model of consultations and engagement with Indigenous peoples, they're involved at the very beginning levels of the project. So it's not like someone puts together, gets a project designed, engineered, and ready to go, and then you ask the local Indigenous communities if it's a yay or a nay. If you're doing that, you've not understood what UN DRIP is all about, what the duty to inform, to consent and consult is all about. We need to involve Indigenous communities throughout the process, so they are actually airing their concerns and their issues while the projects are being designed. We're demonstrating an ability to adapt to their fears and their concerns, and we're building a future with them where we're not simply taking advantage of them as they felt we did for so many decades and centuries.
I have to say, I think I mentioned to a cameraman, I had 4 interviews with Prime Minister Harper, and I think the total amount of time might have been 5 minutes. So I just want to appreciate the fact that in one interview you multiplied that by 6 in terms of time, and I think that's important for Canadian democracy, and it has to be said.
Well, I think that's important for Canadian democracy, and you and I spoke many times in interviews like this before I got elected Prime Minister, and I kept saying, no, if I get elected, I'm going to keep my promise. I'm going to stay accessible and connected to people, because how we serve the people who live in this great place and who live right across the country depends on how well we can both listen to them, respond to their concerns, and be open and frank.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate
pleasure,
your time.
Peter. Thank
okay,
you.
cheers. Thank you for joining us.